All right. Hello, everyone. Today, we are going to be giving you this blast pot buying guide to help you guys figure out which blast pot is most appropriate for you and your business goals. We recognize that investing in any sandblasting equipment, whether it's Dustless blasting or any other media blaster on the market, you want to be sure that this is the right pot for you. And so we're going to go over some key considerations when picking out a blast pot. And really those considerations are for any blast pot on the market. And those are your continuous runtime. So how long you want to be able to blast for before you have to stop and refill with your media of choice. Your budget, of course, and then what size air compressor you already have and what nozzle you want to pair with that air compressor. So those are the main factors that you should really be considering and researching when you're looking at buying a blast pot. So Ghilardi, let's start off with kind of giving a brief overview of our different blast pots,
Sure.
what that means, and the main differences between each pot.
Okay, so let's keep it simple. All of our blast pots fundamentally operate the same way.
Yeah.
They do the same thing.
Yep.
The main difference between them is just how long you can blast before you need to refill.
Yep. That's spot on. So they all blast wet and dry with a variety of abrasive materials on the market.
Right.
You have complete control over your pressure setting. So you can adjust your pressure down to 50 PSI all the way to 125 PSI. Really, it's just how long do you want to blast for in between filling up your pot? And I guess let's talk about why that's important. You know, for someone who's on a big industrial job and is blasting all day long, what does that look like for them?
So sometimes how long a job can take is not up to you, right? If it's up to a client, you only have 2 weeks, you need equipment that can get that job done in 2 weeks. So if you have, a blast pot that you need to refill every 30 minutes, and it takes 10 minutes to refill every time,
right?
Then that's going to eat up into your job time tremendously.
Yeah. And if you're someone who's only blasting small parts and only blasting 1 to 2 hours per week, then stopping to refill isn't going to be a big deal to you. Now, if you're on a job where you're blasting all day long, 10 hours a day for a week, then stopping to refill is going to be more of an annoyance than anything. So just ask yourself, how many hours are you planning on blasting per week? And if it's a ton of hours, consider getting a blast pot that has a longer continuous runtime. So let's go into the main factor that people need to know, and that is the air compressor. So the blast pot, I just want you to think of that as your middleman, right? It's what holds the media. It is the pressurized vessel. It's very important. But the determining factor for how quickly you get a job done is the size air compressor that you have paired with the appropriate size nozzle. A lot of people think that the blast pot determines your air compressor size, but it's actually your nozzle size and your air compressor that are married together. So let's maybe give a little bit of an example using our nozzle chart for people to kind of reference.
Yeah, so the nozzle chart is the go-to resource here. If you're thinking about productivity, maybe you should think about what nozzle do you want to blast with first.
Yes, so let's talk about why nozzle sizes matter and what does that even really mean? So consider your nozzle size like a paintbrush. If one painter is painting a room with a really, really small paintbrush and you have another painter who's painting with a big paintbrush, who's going to finish the room faster?
Right.
The guy with the bigger paintbrush.
Exactly.
That's your nozzle size, except you're obviously just removing coatings instead of adding to it. So if you are going to be covering a large surface area, you're blasting an entire building, you're going to want a bigger nozzle size. However, if you do not have an air compressor that can accommodate that nozzle size, then you can't use the nozzle size.
No, the nozzle will sputter.
Yeah.
It just won't work.
Exactly. So your air compressor has to be able to keep up with the nozzle size because the nozzle size determines how much air is coming out of that pressurized blast pot. And if your compressor can't keep up with it, then you lose all efficiency completely.
So I have a question, Kaylin.
Yeah.
What nozzle does our 500S ship with?
That is a great question. So For people who are purchasing a mobile blasting system, they don't have to worry about all of this because we pair them with the blast pot, the air compressor, and the nozzle that are all, perfectly married together. So our 500S series comes with a 185 CFM compressor and a number 5 nozzle. What this allows you to do is blast all the way up to 125 PSI without losing pressure. If you were paired with any other nozzle size, if you went up in your nozzle size, you wouldn't be able to blast at that high of a pressure because you'd be losing too much airflow out of that larger nozzle. So we pair you with the right nozzle for that compressor size.
Right. And another small thing that you want to consider whenever you choose the right compressor for your blast pot and your nozzle is just to give a little bit of extra room, a little bit of extra CFM for your air respirator.
Yeah.
Right. Especially if you're dry blasting.
That's a really good point. People don't think about all the other tools that they might be hooking up to that compressor or, your auxiliary ports.
Right.
And that definitely takes away, the CFM from your compressor. So you might not be able to go as high of a PSI if you've got a bunch of other tools hooked up.
Right. Another one is if you're extending your blast hose even further than, the standard 100 feet.
Yeah. And the rule of thumb there, not to get into too much of the nitty gritty, but the rule of thumb is you never want to extend your blast hose in feet past the amount of CFM on your compressor. So if you're blasting with a 185 CFM compressor, you probably don't want to go past 185 feet. If you do, that's fine. Just know you're going to start to lose pressure at the nozzle.
Gotcha.
Let's give maybe an example from this nozzle chart so people can figure out, for those of you who already have a compressor and you're like, all right, Kaylin, this is a lot. How do I find out what I can get?
It is a lot.
So for the most part, you want to at least, I would say for most jobs, you want to be able to at least maintain 100 PSI. Okay, so let's just always reference 100 PSI. So if you're wanting to maintain 100 PSI using a number 5 blast nozzle, which is pretty industry standard, that's a great size nozzle, then you would need at minimum 137 CFM from your compressor. This is based on this nozzle chart. We've linked this below and it's also on our nozzle page. But again, keep in mind that if you're using, a breathing air respirator or a blast hose extension, you will need more CFM because it's likely that that's taking away from your air compressor.
Right. So in that instance, a 185 CFM compressor is perfect for you. You have more than enough CFM in that compressor to handle any additional tools you have.
Exactly.
You can even tune it up a little bit if you just want a little extra pressure on that job.
So if you are someone who already owns a compressor and you're like, Kaylin, this is way too much. I am lost. There's too many variables. Please call us. We would be happy to find out more about what you're looking to do with our blast pots, what air compressor you have, and what nozzle you need to stay productive. And the last thing that I will say is you'll see on our website that we have minimum CFM requirements. The reason we do that is to try to help you, to set you up for success. So we know if you have a 185 CFM compressor and you pair that with a number 5 nozzle, you are going to be A-okay. So that's why we make these general recommendations. However, if you don't have a 185 CFM compressor and you have a 110 or a 200, please call us because all of those compressors will work with our blast pots. We just have to pair you with the right size nozzle. Just to recap, Glardy, what are the 3, main considerations that people need to factor in when they're picking out a blast pot?
So the 3 main things. First is the blast pot. The only thing you need to consider when it comes to the blast pot is how long you want to run before you need to refill, right?
Yep.
That's all you need to think about. Budget, of course. Then comes your compressor and your nozzle. Those two are interlinked no matter what. Think about what kind of jobs that you have, what kind of nozzle you want to use. That determines how big of a compressor that you need.
Yeah.
And if you don't need that much productivity, then you don't need that big of a compressor.
Right.
It's as simple as that.
And then third thing that I would say is what pressure do you need to be operating at? Yeah. If you're someone who's blasting, really delicate wood, you don't need to be blasting at 125 PSI. You're fine blasting around 60, 70, 80. So you can actually go up in a size nozzle and it won't affect you as much because you're not needing that much pressure. So we know these are a lot of variables, but we'd be happy to help you guys pick out your nozzle size paired with your specific air compressor. But the blast pot's pretty easy. It's really just picking your runtime and at minimum at least having like around 80 PSI. So we hope this is helpful. But again, feel free to give us a call if you need anything.